This video is sponsored by Surfshark. More on them later. I like to think that most game developers aren't inherently sadistic. When you're making a video game, there's always a moment where the design of a game is being funneled towards a specific level of difficulty, and choosing to make a game challenging in the extreme can sometimes be indicative of some sadistic tendencies. We're not looking for hard games today. I'm actually going to try and work out how to talk about the most punishing games. I think that involves a combination of how easy it is to die and what the game does to you when you die. In Super Meat Boy, for example, a famously hard game, you die in one hit because meat is super squishy, but you have infinite lives and respawn at the start of the level, so that's not too bad. I want something absolutely disgusting, and I hope to God we find it. The good news is that we don't have to look very far to find something to satiate our internet safety needs, because this video is sponsored by the fine people over at Surfshark. VPNs like Surfshark let you connect to servers across the globe, with Surfshark in particular having over 3,200 servers spread across over 95 countries, so you can access international streaming libraries and watch, say, Japanese Netflix, and consume all the anime your eyeballs can handle. Plus, I should mention that there's some more serious applications, since online security is more important than ever these days, and Surfshark can help secure your data with industry-leading measures by using uncrackable encryption and the best VPN protocols around, so you can join public Wi-Fi, safe in the knowledge that your personal data is being kept nice and safe. Surfshark is super easy to install and can run on unlimited devices from a single subscription, so you can safely do all your interneting on a massive number of different platforms, and have a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 live customer support. That's like a ton of good stuff. You can go to surfshark.deals/RabbidLuigi and enter the promo code RabbidLuigi for 83% off and 3 extra months for free. That link is also in this video's description if you don't fancy typing all that out. Secure your connection now with Surfshark. Anyway, I'm in the mood to be punished. Oh yeah! If you predicted that this video would talk about some Dark Souls at some point, then congratulations, you're a goddamn oracle. Here's the thing though, despite their reputation for offering up a devastating challenge and causing so much misery, the Soulsborne games are generally pretty forgiving when it comes to difficulty. This is the distinction I want to make with this video. A difficult game isn't automatically punishing just by being difficult, and in fact, if a game has more than a few solutions to a problem that you can then switch to in a crisis, then yeah, the magic and ranged builds in Dark Souls games kind of work like an easy mode. So logically, we just need to find the Soulsborne game with the least options of how to play. The game that practically forces you to master the mechanics and just get on with it. And that's where Sakura comes in. As the outlier in the Soulsborne family, Sakura doesn't have quite the same customizability as other more traditional Dark Souls games. You're a pre-made character playing roughly the same story that everyone else is experiencing, and so you're not left with a lot of options of how to play Sakura. The most complicated fights practically demand that you learn how to parry as well as learn a boss's attack patterns, so you don't take a truckload of damage to the face. You're fairly fragile in Sakura, so you don't need to make too many mistakes before you're staring at the game over screen, and even if you revive yourself, if you've charged up your reviving powers, if you're not good enough to overcome a boss fight, it won't make a difference. Sekiro isn't punishing in the traditional sense, but by narrowing the options that are available to the player, it really does force the player to get good at its punishing difficulty curve with an incredibly high ceiling for all the Master Swordsmen to strive for. It's not traditionally punishing, it's just not very accommodating. No wonder that Sekiro was the game that reignited the debate over easy modes and the crushingly difficult games that should have them. Give Wolf a gun and go to town. What I like a lot about Sekiro is that it actively punishes the player for treating it and playing it like a traditional Soulsborne game, and yeah, sure, a lot of the skills do carry over, but Sekiro is all about exploiting the holes in an enemy's defense to attack their posture, and not so much about rolling around and whittling down this massive health bar, and failing to adapt will make a steep learning curve even more awkward to overcome. You know, it's not actually that much like Dark Souls in the end. And few games are. Indie games absolutely play by their own rules. When you haven't got a publisher to upset, you can make your game as hard as you want and treat the people who play your game like dirt on the bottom of your shoe. That being said, it does help to be reasonably welcoming to new players, and at the very least keep up the pretense of being a fair, balanced video game in order to get new suckers in the door. By the time I first played FTL Faster Than Light, I already knew the game's fearsome reputation as one of the hardest games ever made, but I assumed that a lot of these accusations came from the fact that it was a roguelike with randomly generated problems. You know, I've done my time in The Binding of Isaac. I reckon I can manage the fleet of a spacecraft and try not to be shit on by every random enemy ship that comes my way. Sure sounds easy. FTL is a very harsh lesson in not getting your hopes up and assuming that you're home free. The Binding of Isaac has a few tricky enemies and bosses in store for any player who's becoming a little too relaxed with their loadout, but FTL is something altogether more inevitable. Of course the game can be beaten, but it requires either an encyclopedic knowledge of FTL's mechanics and possible outcomes, or a frankly stupid amount of luck. By the time you get to later sectors, you'll find yourself spending a lot of time with the game paused as you attempt to take stock of a situation that is rapidly spiraling out of control. You can have the best resource management in the world and choose exactly the right person to go to exactly the right location on your ship at the exact right moment to stop it all cracking like some intergalactic egg, and yet there always seems to be a bigger ship on the horizon. FTL isn't naturally cruel, but for starting so promising before having the prospect of victory ripped out of your hand and used to beat you to death, it does feel quite punishing. I get that space is kind of dangerous, but this is still a little bit excessive. Getting the sense that space isn't my thing. Sometimes a game can hide its true intentions, and other times a game's intentions couldn't be more obvious. I do like a game with a hidden agenda, but there's a lot to be said for a game that sets its stall out early and unashamedly provides exactly the sort of entertainment that it's advertising. Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy is the sort of game that has no reason to masquerade as something else, even going so far as to include Bennett Foddy as the narrator to help with your motivation? Yeah, the themes of Getting Over It are fairly transparent, given that Foddy's other games include co-op, and putting this kind of deliberate control scheme into a hammer-controlled platformer is like building a car out of toilet paper. You see, Getting Over It is frustrating and challenging by design, not by making the protagonist die to every hit he takes or slapping you across the face every time you die. Nah, Getting Over It was merely created from the ground up to be a raging arsehole of a video game. Like, the spiciest of poisons. Technically, Getting Over It is a platformer, but because it's quite hard to jump from inside a cauldron, you gotta swing that hammer around and painstakingly drag yourself up a cliff. The controls work, I suppose, but unless you're 100% in control of what you're doing, you are gonna make some kind of mistake, because they're just that sensitive. And when you make a mistake, you fall down, and that's effectively the entire gameplay loop right there. It is agonizing. Yes, Getting Over It with Foddy-san ultimately boils down to how well you cope with setback. It's there in the title and hammered into your skull by the narration, but the sensitive controls seek to aid the theme of literally getting over failure because, wow, does this game punish you hard. It wouldn't make much sense if some rogue inputs from the player was punished by falling a couple of feet, but don't worry about that, because if you take a look at this zoomed out map of the whole game, you'll see how wonderfully vertical all of this is, and especially funnel shaped. Yeah, the more progress you make in Getting Over It, the higher the likelihood of falling very far, if not all the way to the bottom. Highlights include Orange Hell, that has a nasty habit of sending you tumbling all the way to the bottom, and the Snake, which is signposted as somewhere you probably shouldn't be going, but given that the nearby cliff, basically the final challenge of the game, is so steep, you likely won't have a choice. Let's be honest, you can't have a central theme of getting over it without having some kind of incredible problem to get over. Just as long as you know what you're getting yourself in for. I realise that punishing can stretch to lots of different video games we relax our definition. Like horror games, if you're stumbling across something scary like a jump scare, then the game is punishing you for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, possibly. If you're making a decision that the game disagrees with and then seeks to punish you for, then yes, you're being punished for not doing the right thing in a video game. You know, games can be punishing quite often. I probably have more appreciation than most for video games that chastise a player for making a certain choice. That's probably because of my love for Spec Ops: The Line, which can get fairly heavy-handed with its criticisms of who the player is and what kind of terrible things they've done, but crucially, Spec Ops doesn't actually give you a choice to make. Now instead, for a more torturous experience, you should probably check out Lisa the Painful, which I gotta say, I know I said getting over it wasn't trying very hard to deflect attention away from what kind of game it is, but I get the feeling that Lisa has played this game before, because do I even want to play Lisa the Painful? Is this game gonna fight me? Should I be juicing before this? Well, luckily, Lisa isn't so keen to break the fourth wall and cause you physical pain, but punishing inconvenience and emotional pain are far from off the table. Lisa takes place in a post-apocalyptic world devoid of women, and your goal as the main character, Brad, is to protect the baby girl he finds one day, like Earthbound violently mashed together with The Last of Us. Most of the inconveniences come in the form of sacrifices, which are actually a really clever way of A, giving the player some choice, but also B, some extra replayability. Throughout the story, you end up getting ambushed a bunch of times and you have to make some tricky decisions, namely, do you let some of your party members die, or do you lose an arm? You know, an arm, that thing that does lots of things for you. Either way, you're punished. You can lose valuable members of your team, or you can go through the rest of the game with one less arm, which can drastically affect your options in combat. And if you choose to lose both arms, well, looks like all you can do is bite some falls now. Not even sure what the right choice is here, but you're punished regardless, and hey, at least it's consistent. Can't say that the game never told me this was coming. Can we just all agree that older games are more punishing than newer games generally? Like, I shouldn't even need to say that, because most people understand that that's just what video games were like for a spell before the turn of the century. If I was making this video objectively, should it be full of older games? Yes! Would that be boring? Also yes! And since I really don't need any help being boring, we've shaken things up a bit today, but I can't escape the inevitability that we've got to end this thing with an older game. Most older games are punishing because killing the player gave the illusion of better value for money for shorter video games. And this is kind of a hilarious thought because Battletoads isn't even all that short. Like, there's 12 long levels here, which is more than most other games of the time could offer, so maybe the difficulty didn't need to be so savage? I don't think we need a game that takes my health away this fast if there's this much that I have to play. So, Battletoads is kind of ridiculous, and I know it's a meme, but there's a reason why. It was originally created as a response to the popularity of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, with a lot of parallels seen in how the brawler stages play out, but of course Rare wants to put their own spin on it, and so also created racing levels and vertical levels. The brawling stages are a little tricky, but Battletoads gives you weapons and plenty of space to defeat enemies in. Every other kind of level though, and I'd say that's basically 9 or 10 stages depending on how you count them, these other stages are so brutally punishing with hazards or enemies that one-shot you that it completely changes how you play through Battletoads. Basically, you don't. In order to beat Battletoads, you need to navigate all these problems in all of these admittedly varied levels without taking loads of damage and losing all your lives because, of course, being that Battletoads came out in 1991, there's no checkpoints outside of triggering end-of-stage boss fights, and a game over means exactly that, starting again from the beginning. At which point you're back to stage 1, you think it's kind of okay, and then it just all goes downhill from there. There are perhaps other games out there that are even less accommodating, but Battletoads is legendarily punishing, and I don't think few games have ever been more iconic with their difficulty. We ain't seen anything like this again. Battletoads is almost like a trap. It looks like a normal video game, and it almost plays like a normal video game, but it unravels like a punchline, and by the time you realize what's happening and what it is you're playing, it is way too late. This is RabbidLuigi, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more in the future, and if you want to watch another video right now, there's a video here where I ranked a bunch of Final Fantasy games. I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Sarah Malion, Raina Baina Bobana, and Scott Riker. Thank you for watching, and always leave Battletoads at the door.